Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. Hi there, and thank you so much for joining me. Today, I talk with Sharon Vincuilla of Human Canine Collaborative all about co regulating our nervous systems with our dogs. With a doctorate in occupational therapy and certification as a professional dog trainer and dog behavior consultant, Sharon has extensive experience in taking an interspecies approach to helping dogs and their humans find grounding and joy by co-regulating their nervous systems. In particular, her practice focuses on supporting neurodivergent dog guardians in regulating their nervous systems while reducing reactive, anxious, or aggressive behavior in their dogs. And today, she shares with us what this can look like in practice and some simple tips that you can apply in your relationship with your own dog. I was really excited to have Sharon on the podcast because the conversations that she brings to the table around the need to recognize different ways of processing the world and the need to create inclusive ways of supporting pet parents and dogs with different sensory needs are just so important to be having. In talking with Sharon, I found myself having so many aha moments, including realizing areas where I personally can become more empathetic and inclusive with humans and dogs alike, and where I can have more self-compassion too. I really appreciated that Sharon asked if we could start the conversation with some breath work to anchor us both into our bodies and to the moment so that we could be more present for one another in our conversation. I just loved that suggestion and asked if we could actually invite you, the audience, to join us too, and she was thrilled to do that. So this episode starts off with Sharon leading us through a short grounding exercise, which we invite you to join us in if it feels safe and comfortable for you to do so. From there, Sharon then shares her journey of bringing together occupational therapy and an understanding of dog behavior and dogs' emotional needs via her experience in animal-assisted interventions. This ultimately led her to the work that she does today in the Human Canine Collaborative. There is so much goodness in this episode, but to give you some highlights, you will learn about what a sensory diet is and how to use it to better meet your dog's and your own sensory needs. Really helpful tips and tricks to build awareness of your nervous system's needs, your dog's nervous system needs, and how to co-regulate. We talk about neurodiversity and neurodivergence and whether or not it's appropriate to think about our dogs in these contexts and using these terms. We learn why Sharon refers to her dog Muggins with the they, them pronouns, and why you may consider doing the same with your dog. We learn about how Muggins' experience with stress, trauma, and hypersensitivity paralleled Sharon's own experiences of navigating a diagnosis of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and autism, and how she worked with and through that. And finally, we'll leave you with some tips on how you can navigate difficult situations where you and your dog are actually both triggered at the same time. Before we dive in, just a quick note that this episode is sponsored by Aspirationary, which in full transparency is another project of mine where we create books, notebooks, and stationery to support you in becoming all you aspire to be. I'm really excited to announce that we have released a Spanish language version of our popular My First Period tracker for young girls and tweens in order to increase menstrual literacy and empower young people to become advocates for their menstrual health. You can learn more about our books on Instagram at Aspirationary, and that's spelled Aspirationery. Okay, on that note, let's go. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining me on the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. I am really excited that you're here with me.
Hi, Alexia. Thank you so much for such a warm welcome. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think this is going to be a conversation that's going to help a lot of people and really shed some light on both the human and the dog ends of the leash. So I think a lot of people will benefit from it. But you had reached out to me and said that you would like to start off the conversation with a little bit of a grounding and breathing exercise. And I just love that. And I'd love to invite listeners who are in a safe place to be able to do this. So if you're driving, please don't do this. But if you're in a space where this is safe and it feels comfortable, I'd love to invite you to take part in this grounding and regulating exercise with us. And so, Sharon, I'll let you lead.
Awesome. Yeah, so anytime I like begin a conversation with somebody, I like to just turn inward to myself for a few moments to really like just connect with myself and make sure I don't lose sense of myself when I'm interacting with the other person. So we're just going to take 3 deep breaths. We're going to go in through the nose and out through the mouth. And I'll guide us through that because we're going to make the inhales a little bit, well, about like 4 seconds, and then the exhales will be longer to help us shift into a more grounded state or to like turn on the rest and digest setting of our nervous systems. So go ahead and get comfortable in your seat. If you'd like to close your eyes for this, you can, but you don't have to. I like to put one hand on my heart and one hand on my belly to just really feel myself and feel my body. But you can put your hands wherever is comfortable. I'm going to close my eyes and we're going to do 3 rounds. So go ahead and inhale through your nose for about 4 counts and exhale through your mouth. Make a really small opening so that the air leaves as slowly as possible. And go ahead and inhale through your nose again. And exhale through a small opening in your mouth, like you're blowing through a straw. And one more time, inhale through your nose. And exhale through your mouth. And then go ahead and let your breath return to normal and open your eyes if they were closed.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Sharon. That's such a gift and such a perfect way to start a conversation all about co-regulation, the role of our nervous system, and really engaging with ourselves and our dogs in more complete ways. So I'm excited to get into this.
Awesome.
Yay.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about regulation needs that I have during a conversation like this. And so that was my like practice of co-regulation was to request that we do this breathing exercise so that I could feel grounded, but also so that we could enter the space grounded together.
Oh, I love that. And it's funny too. I was really appreciative that you had asked me about that because one, I think it's important that we articulate our needs and that
Mhm.
we develop a practice of doing that because I think so often we tend not to. We tend to feel uncomfortable asking for what it is that we need and even being aware of what it is we need, to be honest, that kind of step before that. But
Mhm.
also in terms of connection, I have a little practice that I do myself before I get on a call, whether it's a podcast call or with a client or whatever. And that is one of calling in this recognition of the connection that we have through divine love and
Mm.
seeing our heart spaces as connected and creating an invitation for whatever needs to come through our collaboration that will be spread out through divine love to all those who need it or who would benefit from it to do that. And actually a recognition that in the sharing of that, I benefit as an individual, as does the other person that I'm speaking to, as does everyone else who engages with us. So I love that kind of practice of connecting with the self and recognizing that in doing so, you are having a ripple effect, which is just really beautiful.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate hearing how you're like practicing connecting to yourself, but also preparing to connect with others and with
Mm.
all of us.
Yeah. Definitely. And to be honest, I think this is going to lead really well into our conversation about how we relate with our dogs because
Mm.
from what I understand with your work, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how you got into this work of marrying like occupational therapy, dog behavior, somatic and trauma-informed work into our
Mhm.
relationships with our dogs, because I think it's so rich and so needed. But I think something that's really come to the fore with me with having a quote unquote reactive dog is at first my whole focus from sort of traditional training worlds, positive reinforcement, but still a kind of traditional operant approach, was so focused on him. And in
Mhm.
reality, what became very obvious to me pretty quickly, thankfully, was that actually I needed to start with myself. And without a proper grounding in myself, there was no way that I was going to be able to help him change his perspective on experiences. So I
Mhm.
love that you invite that awareness because I think it's so important. But I would love to hear a little bit more about how you got into marrying these two worlds that on the surface seem like, well, they're really different. How does that come together? But in reality, you bring them together in such a beautiful way. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you saw that connection?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Um, I'm trying to think of like where the story begins because it wasn't like like a single moment where I was like, oh, all of these things should go together. You know, it was more like a gradual awakening, like, stages of awakening, where I would say like the first stage was learning about dog behavior. I was a dog trainer and I worked in Los Angeles at the time and got into the like rescue rehabilitation world. So I was working with a lot of dogs who came from really stressful or traumatic backgrounds and helping them either find homes or adjust to their new homes or like just recover after a bite situation or an experience of anxiety or something like that. So I was just learning a lot that way about how past experiences impact current behavior and all of that. And so yeah, so like that was the first stage is like understanding dogs. And then I detoured from dog training and went to, well, I guess there was a stepping stone. So I went into animal assisted interventions and was volunteering with my own dogs and ended up being the director of a program that trained other humans and their dogs to get registered as therapy dog handler teams and visit various sites. And I really just fell in love with that work. I think my favorite part of it was seeing how a dog provided opportunity for humans to connect with other humans. And like that was really what people needed. It wasn't like the dog was providing the therapy, it was more like the dog was someone to talk about or like a reason to go and visit nursing homes and homeless shelters and children's courts and things like that. So then, because I wanted to do animal assisted interventions full time, then I went to school for occupational therapy.
Oh, okay. And for those who aren't really familiar with what occupational therapy entails, could you describe that a little bit? What does that look like?
Mhm. Yeah, occupational therapy or OT is a holistic health profession that focuses on helping people build skills or recover skills or learn compensatory strategies so that they can do the things that are meaningful to them, the things that they need and want to do every day. And so traditionally, OTs will work in like physical rehabilitation settings where people have had surgeries or perhaps a spinal cord injury or something or a brain injury. OTs also work in schools with children who need extra support to be able to access learning environments. And OTs also work in mental health. But very few of us work in mental health. And that was the direction that I decided to go in. So in my work, that's where I started to blend dog training and human mental health because I worked in mental health settings and I was working with adults who had experienced significant trauma or who had been hospitalized and were trying to recover and integrate back into the community. And so I developed a coaching program to teach people about their nervous systems and their sensory processing patterns and helped them build sensory diets so that their nervous systems could re-find a sense of safety and rhythm and so that they could engage in things like going back to school or work or participating socially and things like that.
Oh, I love it. That's really helpful because I think most people are probably familiar with an OT in a workplace setting after an accident or something like that. So I love that actually there's a really rich way in which occupational therapists are working in different capacities in different kinds of environments. And I think it's really interesting. So you used the term just then sensory diets. Could you talk a little bit about what that is and what that entails for the person as well as for the dog?
Yeah. So a sensory diet is it's you can think of it as a daily routine or even as a lifestyle. And the diet it provides specific types and amounts of sensory input, specifically for humans and dogs. The diet should definitely incorporate something that involves movement of the limbs, something that involves movement of the head, and then something that provides deep pressure touch. And so it could be any kind of activities that provide one with those types of experiences, because those are like the core foundational senses of the nervous system that really provide strong nourishment to the nervous system and help to strengthen the mind-body connection and establish a sense of safety and rhythm in the body. So those could be things like, for me, I practice yoga. Yoga provides me with all three types. So movement of my head, my limbs, and deep pressure because I'm engaging my big muscle groups and like having to tense them and contract them. It could be swimming, it could be hiking, it could be running, it could be playing tug with your dog, it could be doing Leslie McDevitt's pattern games with your dog, all those types of things.
Oh, I love that because I think so often, especially from my world being in canine nutrition, we think of diet very much isolated to kind of like the food context, the bowl
Mhm.
context.
Yeah.
But what's really important about what I'm hearing from what you're saying too is that we need to take in the full perspective of our dog's needs and our needs as well, and actually how there's such a crossover between our dog's nervous systems and their needs and our nervous systems and their needs. And so how do we kind of simultaneously look at supporting them
Mhm.
and how that is just as important as what you're putting in the bowl in terms of when we're looking at
Mhm.
holistic overall health. Yeah.
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 Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, can you talk to us a little bit about in practice? Because I know that you support humans and kind of coach humans, but you also, because you have a dog training background as well, you're really familiar with how to best support a dog. How do you work with dog parents to better understand how to integrate those needs for one another? And especially because I feel like in this community, we tend to really prioritize our dogs, which is why I really like that you had us focus on ourselves first. And I think it's brilliant. Obviously, we want to make our dogs a priority, but as we were talking about, we have to be a priority in this equation as well. So, what are some practical things that you end up seeing being beneficial for helping the pet parents support their own nervous system while supporting their dog's nervous system? And can that happen at the same time, or is that something that needs to be thought of separately?
Hmm. Those are really good questions. So what was coming to mind while you were asking that question was this practice of just like slowing down and listening. I always think of this as the first step, right? In order to be able to know what we need, we have to be able to feel what's going on in our bodies. And we have to be able to, um, well, I don't want to say we have to be able to, because I'm thinking of co-regulation in terms of like there's one version of it or one type of it where we gain a lot of awareness and we have a really grounded presence and we practice listening and being really intentional with it. But we co-regulate without that. We naturally seek out opportunities to co-regulate, and our bodies feel certain ways and have certain needs and will drive us to meet those needs, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. So I want to really make sure people understand that there isn't like an intellectual hurdle to get over in order to be able to co-regulate. I don't want to create a hierarchy or a barrier to co-regulation, or to minimize the body's natural way of functioning and guiding us to get what we need, whether we're aware of it or not. But when I'm helping pet parents, I help them to build awareness so that they can do this intentionally. And part of that means slowing down in terms of like um, creating space in your day, like not doing as many things, saying no to things, finding time to do nothing or to sit still or to just sit and focus on what am I feeling right now. Because for me, as a neurodivergent person, I have had a lot of trouble feeling my body. And part of that is because of like being in a chronic state of dissociation. And then part of that is being autistic and having disrupted interoception and just like sometimes not feeling things until they become really intense, or having difficulty discerning between like, am I hungry or is that a cramp, or am I bloated, and just like not knowing which is which, or just not having the language to be able to describe it because I never learned it, and so it's been a practice of just like learning what those words are and being able to name the different sensations, while also learning that I need more time for the sensations to arise. So I need to create that time and space so that my body has time to formulate the communication that I can understand and recognize, so that I can know what it is that I need.
I love that. That's so helpful. And I think it's so important developing that sense of self-awareness and recognizing that you're an individual and that how you process the world is going to be unique to you, and honoring that. There was something that came up for me that was sort of a light bulb moment that is related to what you were just describing, where I became aware, totally different kind of context, but there was this system I've talked about on the podcast before, coming across a system of human design and
Mm,
how understanding the way that an individual's energy patterns work for me was really helpful. It doesn't not everyone's going to get something from every modality, but for me, there was kind of a light bulb moment in learning about my energy type and how I had always struggled to fit myself into a particular box that never worked. And as a result of that, constantly feeling in conflict and then turning that inward and actually starting to devalue my own way of being in the world, and in a sense sort of like shaming myself and telling myself that I was wrong, that no, I needed to do it a different way. And one of the things that was really helpful in learning about this was actually the way that I'm meant to make decisions in the world. And this took, I can't even tell you the amount of stress this has taken out of my life by just learning about my pattern of making decisions. And one of the things that was so helpful within that was recognizing, I think this relates really well to what you were just describing about becoming aware of your own internal feelings, like physical feelings, not just your kind of emotional feelings, but it's advised for my energy type, which is manifesting generator, that we are not meant to make decisions at a high or a low point emotionally with
mhm,
something. So if I'm offered something, it relates to you saying how you need to sometimes take time. I need to take time as well. That I'm not meant to just make an instant decision or make a decision like if I'm offered an opportunity of something, whatever, even if it's like ice, do you want some ice cream? Or do you want to like go on this big trip? It doesn't matter. It's the same kind of thing. The time scale will be a little bit different for each one of those decisions.
mhm. Yeah.
But allowing myself to process the feelings that come up where I might be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that sounds really amazing. Oh,
Mhm,
but I don't know if I can manage to do that. And allow the waves and just wait until I'm in a neutral state where I don't feel the kind of almost like the polarized experience of that.
Hmm.
Make the decision at the neutral state. And so if that means I have to say to somebody, can I get back to you in 3 days?
Hmm.
That's actually okay, instead of putting the pressure on myself, like I've got to respond to that right now, when that would put me under such immense stress.
Hmm.
And I would feel it in my nervous system, and it would make me feel like physically sick and like heart palpitations, and all these physical things would come as a result of me putting that kind of pressure. So I love that you're describing that kind of honoring, whether you identify as neurodivergent or not. Actually, really, I think so many of us are tasked in this society where we're very head based. It's like
Hmm.
it's almost like we don't exist from the neck down. We're really
Hmm.
discouraged from being in the body and understanding the body. That so much of the experience now, I feel, is an invitation to actually start focusing more downward, right? Like, so that grounding, and feel what's coming up and get familiar with what are your own energy patterns and what are your own needs to support those energy patterns.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. There is such a um almost like a judgment or a devaluing of listening to the body and taking time. And I think like it's so neuronormative also, like prioritizing this one way of processing, which is like processing only in the brain or the mind and being quick about it. And like one experience I'm thinking about that's a perfect example is like when you're walking your dog and somebody asks if they can say hello without stopping across the street. They just are coming toward you, expecting you to either be able to answer quickly and that the answer is going to be yes.
100%. That's that's actually not quite my worst nightmare, because that would be a little bit more welcomed than what's usually happening to me, which is an off-lead dog running at
Mhm.
mine, screaming,
Yeah.
and the person screaming, "They're friendly, can they play?" And it's like,
Mhm.
the whole situation is just too much for me to handle in those moments.
Yeah, it's happening so fast and it's so unsafe.
It is unsafe. It is unsafe. And I wonder too how you then are relating that with dogs, because I would imagine that there are similar kinds of processes, particularly dogs that have gone through trauma. I see this with Lucky. He's experienced trauma, and I can see so many of it's like he's mirroring to me, in that there's an invitation for me to take a different perspective on me and on him. But I can see many of the patterns that I have as somebody that has difficulty processing with immediate things. He has that same thing as well. And so it's been an invitation for me to kind of look at, how do I support him with that? He's not always necessarily able to make that quick decision, like, do I like this dog, do I not like this dog, what do I want to do, like that kind of a thing. I wonder if you could talk about that kind of application to our dogs too, and some things we can do to support them.
Yeah. So I apply this to dogs in like two ways. There's one way, which is thinking about helping the dog to be able to feel their own body and communicate their needs, and validating, acknowledging, affirming their needs, right?
Hmm.
Making sure that the dog has specific skills or can learn specific skills to communicate specifically what they need or what they want. So like that's one part of it. And then the other part is the human's ability to recognize the dog's nonverbal cues, to be able to recognize what is the dog communicating, what are they feeling, what are they needing right now. And then there's this interaction between the human and the dog where we both have needs and we both have strategies that we need to take to get those needs met. And are those strategies in conflict with each other? Or are they going to help us both? And so there's a lot of decision making that's involved in that, which can be like deciding whether or not to let your dog choose a direction on a walk, for example. Like Muggins will do this all the time where they will go. I give Muggins a lot of choice on walks. And so they'll ask to go a certain direction. And if I don't stop and think about or feel into what I'm needing in that moment, or just reflect on what else do I need to do today? How much time do I have? or to just look at, okay, what's the weather like? What's the traffic on the street like? Are we thirsty? Do we have enough water left? Do I have enough treats left? Like all of these things that I need to check in on and track. If I just cater to Muggins's desires and say, yeah, sure, we can go there. Um, and I don't realize that, like, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, or I'm getting hungry, or you know what, we just passed three really difficult situations. We should quit while we're ahead and go home. So it's really like slowing down again to be able to take note of all these things and be aware of all these things and then make a decision that's right for both of us.
Mm. Oh, I think that's so helpful. And it is the reminder that you're a team when you're out on the walk. And
Mhm.
both parties' needs need to be really, really recognized. I have this whole like bartering system with Lucky because he does the Chihuahua like pancake where he's like,
Mm. Mhm.
we're staying, nope,
Yep.
no, it's like
Yep.
and I don't want to just pick him up. Like I don't want to take his agency away from him. I mean, there are obviously when there are like dangerous situations, he gets picked up. Like
Yeah.
we override that. But it is working with like we're a team here and we have to like support one another and look at like what is the team's goals in
Mhm.
this walk. And sometimes that is like mama's hungry. You've had all the
Mhm.
treats, mama's hungry. We're going home.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is tough. I wonder too, you have touched on the topic of neurodivergence, but in the humans. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that and what that entails for people who might not be as familiar with the term. And also, do you feel like that's an appropriate term or a way of thinking about some of our dogs that might think a little bit differently from the kind of way we think that they should be thinking?
Yeah, great questions. So neurodiversity is a term that was coined by a woman named Judy Singer in 1990. And the term was created to add another category to intersectionality, to acknowledge that each person has a unique nervous system. Everybody's nervous system operates in a unique way. Of course, we have a certain core set of functions and nervous system states and things like that, and structures and things like that. But the patterns by which we operate vary from individual to individual. So there is diversity among nervous systems, so neurodiversity. And so neurodivergence is another term that was coined by Cassiane Asazumasu, and I think it was in 2000. And this term specifically describes, it gives an alternative to the perspective that people whose nervous systems don't operate in the typical way are defective or disordered in some way. Neurodivergence is a difference. It's a divergence from the norm, a separation from the norm, but not a less than or a disorder or a defect or anything like that. And so the way that looks is people can have different patterns for processing sensory information. So that means like you can have hypersensitivity, so being very sensitive in some of your senses and not others. Some people might be sensitive to sound or to light, but not to smell. Another person might be sensitive to smell, but not to light, and things like that. So there's diversity in how we perceive and detect the world and integrate that sensory information into our nervous systems. And then there's also diversity in terms of how we think, in terms of how we pay attention, whether our thoughts move linearly from one subject to the next or like a spider web and go all different directions, whether we need more time to process something before having a response or an answer, or whether we can do that quickly. So there's all kinds of diversity there as well.
Oh, that's super helpful, super helpful. And do you feel like that is an appropriate way to think about and speak about our dogs? Can it be applied or is there another way of framing that?
I think that neurodiversity can absolutely be applied to dogs. I think that it's just a fact. We see it. We see that some dogs are more sensitive to sound than others. We see that some dogs can pay attention really well around distractions and others can't. We see that some dogs really get fixated on a smell and others don't. We see that some dogs have big reactions and others don't react at all. So we see that there is diversity in their nervous systems. In terms of neurodivergence versus neurotypicality, I don't know. I don't know about those terms. I think that for sure, I see that there is like a typical way that we expect dogs to behave and to be able to learn and process and experience and respond to things. And then there are dogs that are very different, right? Like we know that dogs can have post-traumatic stress or anxiety or epilepsy or depression or things like that. We know that they can have those things. There's been a lot of studies on dogs with sound sensitivity and how that relates to anxiety, and how there are actually dogs who are sensitive to sound neurophysiologically. So I think in that way, like, yeah, we're definitely recognizing that some dogs need a different approach. I think just the terms neurotypicality and neurodivergence were created specifically to support a social justice movement or a disability justice movement in humans. And so we just want to be careful about applying those same terms to dogs, because we don't want to compare humans, especially neurodivergent humans, to dogs, because that has been done in the past in order to justify harm against them. And we don't want to say that the experience of dogs is the same as experiences of humans. They are very different, even though they are both significant.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. I think it's a really important reminder. And I think that's why I think it's important to understand where the terms come from as well, like what their roots and their origins are. But and I think also the fact that we're having these conversations about humans and we are becoming much more comfortable with and recognizing it's becoming more mainstream to recognize that there are differences in the way that we engage with the world, the way we perceive it, what our needs are in the world. I think that that can become a really that openness. So not necessarily the terms, but the fact that it's opening us and creating other opportunities for different perceptions, applying that sense of openness to the way that we're engaging with our dogs. And even with specifically like how you just mentioned too, we have expectations of dogs. We are
Mhm.
the ones that are creating those kinds of expectations of how a dog should learn and how long it should take them and how they should be in society and all of that kind of stuff. That's all on us. So when we apply that openness, all of a sudden it's like, well, hold on a second. Is that true? Right?
Mm.
You know, like it creates the conversation. And I think that's very much what I see in your work as well, is that you're creating you and in your approach and the way you're talking about all of this is such a catalyst for asking different questions. And we can't make any kinds of changes until we actually are aware that a different question needs to be asked, right?
Yeah, well, that's such a great way to put it. Yeah, like we just need to be really curious about something, like why is the dog behaving that way? Why don't they want to eat right now? Why is it that they have this huge response to the same thing that happens every single day and they never get used to it?
Yeah. And then simultaneously flipping that back on us. And what are the expectations we're putting on us? And can we be more open and compassionate and curious about
Mhm,
that rather than sort of like that judgmental or condemnation kind of perspective that we can so often come from. So I think
mhm.
that's really helpful. I wanted to ask you too, we had talked about before we started the conversation that you refer to muggins as they in terms of pronouns. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about where that comes from for you.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I use they them pronouns for muggins to normalize the use of the singular they them pronouns in everyday language, and also to practice using those pronouns so that I can show up better for my non-binary and trans family and friends. And I speak about this publicly because I want to just invite people to practice using they them pronouns, so that because it does take practice, and we need to practice on our own in a way that is um, not like putting us in a shame spiral when we make a mistake, like I want people to be able to practice in a way where when they make a mistake, they're not offending anybody. Like Muggins isn't going to be upset if you use he or she or they or whatever pronoun you want. I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to correct you, but I'm going to invite you to play with me and try those pronouns out, so that when your family member realizes that they're trans or non-binary and invites you to use different pronouns for them, that you have a way to practice it and show up for them without asking them to do extra labor or care for your feelings or anything like that.
Oh, I love that. And that's such a wonderful way to, again, break down some of these norms that we have just become entrenched in and don't necessarily think about. We are responding from autopilot, and so actually like bringing awareness and being more conscious of the various things that we're doing and the decisions we're making and how we're engaging and how we're seeing people and just the world. I think that's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you something too that you have on your website that I think is so interesting. And I think some people will find a little bit controversial or a little bit difficult to handle. But I think it's such an important thing to address. You talk about how our dogs don't actually love us unconditionally and how we don't love them unconditionally as well. And I wondered if you could dive into that a little bit.
Ooh, no one's asked me this in a while. I'm so delighted that you found that page on my website. It's under my mission. It's my mission statement under Meet Sharon, if anyone is curious. So yeah, so I've thought about this a lot, and I don't like to say that dogs love us unconditionally. I think I do like to acknowledge that we all need a sense of unconditional positive regard. And I think that's why we like to think of our dogs as viewing us in that way, because we need that so much, and we often don't have that or experience that. But I think that in order to love someone unconditionally, you need to be in a position where you could not love them and still have all of your needs met. And I don't think that dogs are in that position with us. I think that they are in a position to need us to care for them, need us to like them in order to survive. And so if they didn't love us, that would threaten their own survival. And we've seen that, we see that when dogs behave with aggression um, or like growl or bite or things like that, that we question whether or not they should stay in our home. Sometimes they don't stay in our home. Sometimes they don't stay alive when they behave in that way. And so they need to love us. They need to appease us in order for their own survival. And I think simultaneously we are not loving them unconditionally, even though we love them so much. But there are situations in which if they behave a certain way, we will not keep them alive or we will not keep them in our home. And and I think, or at the very least, we will use aversive methods on them and punish them. And so I think that, yeah, in our society, if we're looking more broadly, that if we're really thinking about what it means to love someone unconditionally, I don't think that dogs or humans are practicing that necessarily with each other.
Thank you for sharing that. I find it so interesting. And I think that it's the reason I wanted to ask you about it because I think it is an important thing for us to start looking at in terms of it. It again invites a different perspective and it kind of shines a light on the fact that we have essentially made our dogs captives. Like you're saying, they're completely dependent upon us. So the flip side of that too is how can we take the most steps to give them a really enriched, fulfilled life, understanding that we have created the context of captivity for them, right? And also, how much are we projecting upon them to meet our needs and whether or not that's a fair thing to do. And it's then the invitation too of really, like you've been saying, like to become so self-aware of recognize one, being able to notice what your needs are, right? To
Mhm.
acknowledge them, to be able to voice them, to be able to ask for them, and when and where it's appropriate to be doing that with our dogs or with other people, that kind of awareness of what it is that we need. And I just think that we so often default to the unconditional love characteristic of dogs that it's worth questioning, right? It's worth shining a light on to do a bit of a deeper dive into that and what that actually means for them.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think I just want to add that like I'm not speaking about behavioral euthanasia in the situations in which that is like absolutely necessary.
Right.
And it is done with love for the dog. I really believe that that choice is made with love for the dog, and sometimes rehoming too. Sometimes that is absolutely what is best and what is needed. But I think I'm speaking more broadly in terms of like our societal like laws and structures, you know, in terms of like sometimes people have to make the choice for behavioral euthanasia because racist capitalism has put them in such a position that they cannot afford what would be necessary. They can't afford to move and buy a house with a large yard and put in a huge fence that is impenetrable so that their dog can stay alive. Or sometimes they can't access the veterinary behaviorist that they need to get the dog the medication that they need to make the dog safe and able to remain in the home. So I don't want to frown upon rehoming
Yeah.
or behavioral euthanasia in those
No, of
situations.
course, of course, of course. And thank you for clarifying that. And I think it's so important to raise those other issues and questions though, because I often talk about how dogs, one of the things that I've noticed in my life with Lucky is that he, in terms of being one of my teachers, so I often refer to him as like a great teacher in my life. And
Mhm.
that comes in different ways and at different levels. But
Mm,
one of the things that I think has been really eye-opening to me about having a dog is how just the nature of having a dog puts you in different contexts that you would never come into if you didn't have a dog, and
mhm,
asks those other really big questions too that you wouldn't necessarily be aware even needed to be asked if you didn't have the experience of having a dog. So like you're saying about the systemic issues that we have, that having a dog actually puts a different perspective on for you, that forces a different way of looking at, that raises the fact that there's a problem at different levels. And then it's an invitation for us to actually ask ourselves, how are we participating in those systems and how can we make change within those systems? You know,
mhm. Yeah, yeah, I love how you're just speaking to the fact that the experiences that we share with dogs, or like because of our dogs, we're put into certain situations or experiences that like brush up on the societal structures or like make those societal structures and oppressive structures and systems really personal for us, or that just shed light on like what our needs actually are because we're like if we're living with a reactive dog, for example, we are living in a situation that is causing us a unique kind of stress that puts us up against our limits.
yeah. I've definitely been pushed against personal limits for sure. But again, I'd like to refer to them as growth edges now.
Oh, yes, that is a good reframe.
Because I know on the other side of it there is that growth. But again, I think this is part of the gift of dogs is that there's also that element of they create opportunities for empathy in ways that we don't necessarily see or pursue with our fellow humans, that they become the gateway to that.
Mhm,
And when you have that kind of commonality of coming across somebody else who has a dog, for example, that like you're out on the walk or whatever, and it can potentially stir a conversation with somebody you wouldn't necessarily, you probably would have just passed because that's kind of how our society is set up, right? Like we just pass strangers on the street or whatever. So they facilitate those points of connection that I
mhm,
think are really important, particularly in this day and age where we can feel so isolated and we can be so othering to
mhm,
people that don't have the same experiences as we do. And they become a bridge that actually facilitates seeing one another in a different way and seeing the connection that we are, seeing that we're all part of the big divine love, that ripple, right, that I was referring to in the beginning. We are all connected. So they are really unique in terms of facilitating that in a way that other animals don't necessarily, because we don't have the same relationship with those animals.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, and because those animals aren't acting as a social lubricant or a catalyst in the same way. Like lots of people live with cats, for example, but they're not everybody is walking their cats. I love when I see people who are, but cats aren't necessarily going to go for a walk with you and then lead you to talk to another person with a cat, the way that a dog would.
Exactly, exactly. So they're really brilliant in that way.
Mhm.
I wondered if you could talk about your personal experience with Muggins, how you two have grown together and what his, or what the, sorry, what their background is, what their story is.
Yeah. So Muggins originally was born in Tennessee. And in the Northeast of the United States, we have rescue groups who will often take dogs from the southern states where I guess it's not as easy to find homes for them, and they bring them up to the northern states and find homes more easily. So Muggins was one of those. They were brought up to New York in 2020 with two litter mates at the age of like 6 weeks old or 8 weeks old. And I happened to see a picture of them on Instagram. And at the time, my partner and we just moved to New York and we hadn't lived with our own dog in about 4 years. And and it was the pandemic and we had time. And so we were looking to bring a dog into the home. And so I found Muggins, and Muggins was at a shelter about 3 hours from us. And I wasn't sure if they would still be available because the image had been posted like 2 weeks ago, and puppies generally don't last very long at the shelter. But when I sent an email, they said Muggins was still available and had some biting issues, and so was having difficulty getting adopted. And so I was like, great, we're going to come and meet Muggins. And so my partner and I drove out to the shelter and we fell in love with Muggins. Muggins was super, super bright, super cute, really wanted to connect with people and just had this body that was so stressed and just like kind of like engaging in normal puppy like exploration with the mouth, but supercharged in a way. So just like biting everything around, just trying to like grab on and connect and like, what is this? What is that? But you would like move your hand and they would be grabbing onto your sleeve, or you would walk by them, they'd be grabbing onto your shoes, and it was just like constant biting. So my partner and I said, yes, we would love this puppy. And so the day that we drove Muggins home, it was March, but it was actually also a snowstorm. So it took us a really long time to get home. But Muggins didn't have any accidents in the car the whole time because the two of us, Muggins was always really good at communicating and was just very clear about I need to get out and go outside. And they already had an awareness that they didn't want to go to the bathroom in the crate in the car. And I was really good at noticing Muggins's cues. And so we were able to navigate that trip home. And and then at the time, I was just recently diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress. And so I was dealing with that. And I knew I was neurodivergent, but I didn't know that I was autistic. So and the difference between those is like I knew that I had sensory processing differences and hypersensitivities, but I didn't accept myself as disabled or really acknowledge the cognitive differences that I have and the needs that I have for supports. Um, and because I had post-traumatic stress, I was like having these extreme responses to certain situations. And so with Muggins grew really fast and always was really drawn to like want to connect with other humans and other animals. And they grew really fast and got really big and started lunging and barking on the leash. And that really quickly became very overwhelming for me. And I didn't yet have the skills to be able to like be aware of like, oh gosh, what do I need before I take this walk, or like what are the things I need to ask for or the boundaries that I need to set to be able to communicate to Muggins what they should be doing or to set boundaries with other people so they didn't come too close to us. So it was a lot of like lot of overwhelming situations. I had a lot of shame around it because felt like I'm supposed to be this accomplished professional and I'm struggling so much with this dog, And then Muggins was just like, really just like wanting to connect with people and didn't know how, but was like also nervous about it because are they going to touch me? Because Muggins clearly had hypersensitivities to touch and to sound and to things that they were seeing, and also wanted to smell everything. And so it was just this like combination of the two of us, just like trying to navigate this extremely like overwhelming multisensory world that we're in.
Oh my goodness. That is a lot to take on. And I understand so much of it. I can relate to so much of that actually. And especially like, my journey with canine nutrition, I had very similar things to what you're describing about like the shame of like, why is my dog still having some of these health challenges? And like I haven't fixed this or whatever. And actually reframing a lot of that fixing culture,
Mhm.
and looking at from at least from a nutritionist perspective, I can speak about this, and I'm assuming it's quite similar with the behavioral that, every day is different. So you
Mhm.
have to
Yes.
respond to like what's going on with that particular day and that particular time, and that it's all okay. It's not about fixing you're done kind of thing. Like that whole idea just is not even a reality. So why we keep holding on to that to like self-flagellate, I don't understand. It's not helpful. It's so not helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
I wondered within that if there are specific things that you found were really helpful for starting to work through that as not as kind of like a general approach that somebody else might be able to look at and say, oh, there are elements of that I could try out with my dog as well in terms of learning about your own needs and your dog's needs and how you kind of pull that together. Are there any tips that you think would be helpful for people to hear?
Hmm. Yeah, a really simple one that everybody can start today is sit down and breathe with your dog every day for a couple of minutes. I started that with Muggins when they were really young. And at first with Muggins, it was like, I'm going to sit down and hold a chew for like a bully stick or something and let Muggins chew on it in my lap, because that was a way that they could get the touch that they needed, like that just feeling of laying in someone's lap and feeling safe. And they could get that deep pressure from chewing. And I could also have a few minutes where I'm experiencing my puppy in a calm state. I can touch them and feel that softness and that weight on me. And also, I can just sit still and not do anything else for a few minutes. So, whether you have a little puppy or an older dog, like this is something that could be really helpful. And you can either just breathe together with like no treats or chews, depending on how your dog responds. You can do some breathing while you give your dog something to chew on, or you can use treats and you can take a deep breath and then give your dog a treat anytime they also take a deep breath, or when they exhale and let out a sigh, or when they put their head down and just show that they are relaxing.
I love that. So you don't necessarily have to cue a behavior, but actually recognizing, capturing when they are doing something that you really appreciate
Yeah,
with the calm. Oh, I love that. That's
exactly.
so helpful. That is so helpful because I know a lot of listeners struggle with reactive dogs, fearful dogs, all of that. And I think we so often are focused on kind of preparing for that behavior out in public, like
Mhm.
training for different outcomes or desensitizing to that. But actually, from what you're saying too, it really starts like in those quiet moments at home. How are you working with supporting the nervous system? And I
Mhm.
wonder if you could kind of touch on as well how we are actually co-regulating with our dogs in those kinds of experiences. What is
Mhm.
happening to our nervous systems with one another?
Mm. So what you're really asking about is what is neuroception? So like how do the nervous systems communicate with each other, right? So this is a process that happens whether we are aware of it or not. Our nervous systems, through our senses, pick up on everything that's happening in the environment, including the nonverbal cues that our dogs are emitting to us. So, for example, we see what they're doing, we see how they're moving, we see their tail wag and how that movement is. We see whether they're chewing on something or whether they're sitting or laying down. We hear their breath or the sounds of their bark. We smell the smells that are coming from them. And we can feel their bodies with our sense of touch. So through all of that process, we're gathering information about what is going on with their nervous system and what their needs are. And then we are simultaneously giving that information to our dogs. So they see us, they see what we're doing. They see what our hands are doing. They see what clothes we're wearing. They see if we have our shoes on for a walk or our shoes on to go to work. They see whether or not we're pacing around or whether we're sitting still doing something with our hands. Or they hear how we're breathing or the sound of our voice. They can tell whether we're paying attention to them or to somebody else. They can smell much more from us than we can smell from them. So they can smell our stress, they can smell our happiness, they can smell when we are not feeling well, they can smell when we've just eaten. So they can pick up on all of this information. And so that information, like both of our nervous systems are using that sensory information to basically determine, are we safe or is there danger in the environment? And so things that our bodies pick up on that tell us that there's a sense of danger in the environment are like our dog's alarm barks when the FedEx person comes to drop off something, or when there is like unfamiliar car across the street or something like that. Or like when we're walking with them on a leash, when they lunge and pull, you know, our bodies feel that jolt, feel that lack of stability, that challenge to our sense of balance. And it causes us to feel like, okay, our safety is threatened right now. And when we have certain signs of stress, like maybe we just have cortisol going through our body and that makes our sweat smell a certain way, or we let out like a frustrated sigh, or we're venting to our partner about our frustrating day at work and the sound of our voice makes, or the speed at which we're talking. And our dogs pick up on all of this, and that tells them that the environment might not be safe. And vice versa. When we are sitting still and breathing and calm and relaxed, our dogs are feeling a sense of safety. And when our dogs are laying in our laps and breathing deeply and are relaxed, then we feel a sense of safety.
Thank you for highlighting all those different ways in which we're actually informing one another. Because again, going back to what you said at the beginning, that it brings awareness. And so if we can catch ourselves in that moment of recognizing, okay, all of these different, I'm sending all these different cues, that's having an impact on how they're feeling. And therefore that's going to have an impact on how they're behaving. Is there,
Mhm.
if I want to change that behavior, actually, is there something that I can be doing to shift? Not all of it is obviously something we can control, but are there elements that I can control to help communicate that we are safe and that hopefully
Mhm.
we'll see a behavioral change as well? Because behavior is just information, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, it's information about what is going on and what is needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and how we're perceiving, because we're doing the same
Mhm.
thing too, right? Whereas I always talk about how so much of the way that we experience our world as humans, we're meaning makers. We're assigning meanings to everything. So in reality, many things that we're encountering in and of themselves are neutral, but it's the meaning that we're assigning to it that then
Mhm.
gives us a particular feeling, and we're then reacting from that feeling, from that assumption of what we've made it mean. And
Mhm.
so if we are able to recognize that, become aware of that, we can shift things for ourselves and potentially shift things for our dogs too.
Yeah, absolutely. That just makes me think of like neuronormativity and how like if somebody's fidgeting, for example, or stimming in a certain way, and we, because of internalized neuronormativity, we assign that to mean, oh, there's something wrong with me, or I'm weird, or I need to hide that or stop that, versus a neuroaffirming, neurodiversity affirming approach where we're looking at it as like, oh, I'm fidgeting. Oh, I'm stimming. Oh, that means my body needs to move right now so I can regulate, and I need to just do that or ask someone if I can do it so that my needs can be met. That's such a different outcome.
100%, 100%. And so so permission giving, so expansive, and actually it really helps the other person if you're in a situation where you're afraid of doing something because there's another involved in that,
Mhm.
actually really helping them to understand. And I think that's often the missing thing is like somebody just doesn't understand what's going on. And so when we can communicate that, that's so helpful. And again, shifting the way we're perceiving, really opening things up so we can start to have a more expansive view. So
Exactly.
helpful. So
Mhm.
helpful. Sharon, this has been such a wonderful and enriching conversation. I'm so grateful. Is there anything I've not asked you about that you would like to make sure that we do bring to listeners' awareness?
Hmm. That's a great question. Let me think for a second.
Take your time.
I think, well, I'm just trying to think of like if I answered all of your questions, because sometimes there were like two parts, and I will answer the first part. So, yeah, I think maybe one thing that listeners might want to some support with is you were asking a little bit about like when I think this kind of goes with the question of like how are our nervous systems communicating and like what can we do to help our dogs? Like for example, if the dog is having a reaction like to the FedEx delivery person. What do we do in that situation, right? Because the dog is barking an alarm. I'm feeling unsafe. Um, for people who are sound sensitive, that could be pushing you straight into sensory overload or like a meltdown or a shutdown situation. And then the dog also needs support. And so, like, how do we navigate that situation? Um, and so, first, if you're having a meltdown in that situation, take care of yourself. Do whatever you need to do to move through that situation. If your dog, doesn't get support in that moment, that's okay. It's not going to set you back in your training. If the door is closed and no one can let the dog out, then everybody's going to be safe, and it's okay. It's okay when that happens. Um, if there's someone around you who can help, maybe ask that person, can you help the dog so that I can wrap up in my weighted blanket or get an ice pack to put on my head or just close myself in a dark room for a few minutes, like do whatever it is you need to do. If you have the capacity to help your dog and maybe you still need a sensory aid, so like put on your noise canceling headphones or your earplugs or both of them so that you can then get close to your dog without it um, disrupting your ability to help your dog. And then go and thank your dog. Thank them for telling you that there's something there. Thank them for telling you that they're scared and that they need help. And I know you might not be feeling really grateful in those moments. It's really hard to. But if you can think about thanking your dog, the way your voice is going to sound when you say thank you versus when you say be quiet is going to send a different message to the dog. And like, so the thank you is like acknowledging them, like, yes, I see that you're scared. I see that there's something scary out there. Or maybe I don't see anything at all, but I believe you that you are scared and that you need help versus just stop it. There's nothing there. There's no reason to be scared. You shouldn't be having this reaction. And then if your dog will eat treats in that situation, give them some treats, like get some cheese, get some chicken or turkey from the fridge. If your dog can eat those things, or like whatever high value thing your dog can eat, and just start putting it up to their mouth and get them to eat it. And do it quickly. Like at first, when the dog is really mobilized, do this quickly. Give them treat after treat after treat. And then start to gradually slow down and see if your dog will start to look toward you to get the next treat. And see if you can also put the treat on the floor. So you're directing the dog's view, they're like what they're looking at, away from the FedEx delivery person and onto the floor. And then each time the dog looks at you, put another treat on the floor and just keep doing that over and over again. So the dog looks at you, you put a treat on the floor. They look at you, you put a treat on the floor. And this is one of Leslie McDevitt's pattern games called the up and down game. And what it's going to do is it's going to help your dog engage in structured movement of their head, which is going to help their nervous system to regulate. And if you bend your knees when you're putting the treat on the floor, your head is going to be moving up and down, and you're going to be moving your limbs. Your legs are going to bend and straighten, and you're going to be pushing up against gravity. So you're going to give yourself some really nice, structured, predictable movement and deep pressure and balance that's going to help your nervous system regulate. And just keep doing that until the FedEx person is gone and your dog can sit, or like offer a sit or offer a down, and your heart rate comes back to normal, and then go take a nap and drink some water.
I love that. That is so helpful and actually something I can apply with Lucky. Absolutely. I love the thanking them. That was something that I started doing with Lucky as well, of just saying like thank you, thank you. And it does make a difference. And I feel like he senses like I've got a job to do. This is part of my job and I'm letting you know. And it's me recognizing, okay, I might not necessarily like I don't really like the barking at the FedEx guy or whatever, but I
Yeah.
appreciate that you're trying to let me know something, that this is communication and you've done a really good job. And you're right,
Mhm.
it has a very different energy than, oh my God, can you please stop? Stop, yeah,
Mhm.
please be quiet. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that like the dog's job is not to protect you. It's just to let you know that someone is there so you can protect them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I also add in there, I've started using the kind of, I guess you would refer to it as a cue, but like telling Lucky that he's safe. You
Yeah.
know, like you're safe, and
Mhm.
saying it in a really calm and like reassuring voice. So using that with like the delivery guy, or using that so it can translate when we're out on the walk and something out there is really frightening for him. Like, you're safe, I've got you. And then I'm very conscious of making sure that I'm breathing deeply. Like being the things that I know that I control. I can't control my heart rate. I can't control the cortisol that's running through my body, but I can do my best to control certain things so that he feels a little bit more calm. And since I've been doing that and pairing that with a thank you, I do see improvement,
Awesome.
as well as I feel better about it, which,
Yeah.
like, that's a real bonus.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like yelling at the dog is going to happen. We're all going to have those days where we just tell them to be quiet because we can't take another sound. But we get so angry and shameful about ourselves after that, and that doesn't help. So yes, it can have a different it helps to have a different strategy where you're not going to be mad at yourself. But also, if you do yell at the dog, be kind to yourself. You need support. And beating yourself up is not supportive. It's not what you need, and it's not going to help you. And you
And
don't
it's
deserve
exactly, and it's not going to help your dog either.
it.
So if that's your motivation for it, it's like in terms of the shaming,
Mhm.
it's not going to help either. Oh,
Exactly.
that's so helpful, and that's such a really practical example. Thank you for that. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, Sharon. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share? I didn't want to cut you off.
Thank you. Um, no, I think I'm good.
Good. Okay. I wanted to ask you a final question that I ask all of my guests, and this is about Muggins specifically. What do
Mm.
you feel that Muggins has taught you about what it means to be human?
This is such a great question. And I think one of the most important things that I've learned from Muggins, as well as from all the dogs I think that I've worked with over the years, is that being human means that we don't know everything. And I think about like when Muggins is sniffing something on a walk, right? Like we'll be walking along and there's a plant and Muggins will sniff the plant, and maybe there's like a branch or a leaf that extends from the plant, and Muggins will sniff all along that one leaf, that one blade of grass, and like even the very tip of it, and they're smelling this. And I'm always wondering, like, what is it you're smelling? Like, what does that smell like? And like dogs can, from smelling one blade of grass, they can tell who has walked there. What type of being are they? What species are they? Were they hungry? Were they sick? Were they stressed? Were they pregnant? Were they menstruating? And like how many of them were there and how long ago were they there? And I think I could not possibly know that from smelling something. I can't know that from seeing something, and humans have excellent vision compared to dogs. And so it's just so humbling to think about that and to remember that that I don't know everything. Muggins knows things about the environment, about themselves, about me that I couldn't possibly know. And so when my dog is telling me there is something outside, I believe them because even if I can't see it or hear it or smell it, Muggins can. Or if Muggins says, no, I don't want to do that right now, there's a reason. There's a reason, and I don't know it. And Muggins does. And so I think, yeah, I think that's really an important thing to consider that as humans, we don't know everything. And the animals often know something that we don't. And I want to know what that is.
I do too. Wouldn't you just love like a day? Like, do you remember that Freaky Friday movie, like as kids, where you could
Mhm.
like switch? Wouldn't you just love like a Freaky Friday where you could switch with Muggins and be like,
Yes.
what's the world like?
Right? That would be a great day.
That would be a fantastic day.
Mhm.
Sharon, thank you so much for this. If people want to learn more about working with you and your different offerings, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram at Holistic Dog Expert or on my website, hc-collab.com. You can sign up for my free email newsletter, and that way you can learn about things like co-regulation and neurodiversity, and you'll be notified about my upcoming offers. And so usually when I create a new offer, I ask for testers, so I'll give things away for free on there. Yeah, so those are two great ways to stay in touch.
Perfect. And I will leave those links in the show notes as well. Sharon,
Awesome.
thank you. Thank you for your time, your generosity, your wisdom, your presence. I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much for having me here, Alexia.
Thank you so much for joining me in my conversation with Sharon Vincuilla of Human Canine Collaborative. Oh my goodness, so many nuggets in there. What was your biggest takeaway from this episode? I'd love to hear. Let me know in the comments or DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. You can connect with Sharon on her website, hc-collab.com, or on her Instagram at Holistic Dog Expert. And you can even check out her podcast, Happy Dog, Happy Human, that she co hosts with Angela Tuckerman. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts, and I've left all of these links in the show notes below. I'm actively putting together some exciting new episodes for you, but I did want to know what you want more of. You've mentioned to me that you want some more info on nutrition, so I do have a series in the works for you on that. But definitely keep sending me your questions about nutrition because there's so much to talk about when it comes to what we put in our dog's bowl, and I'll just keep making more episodes to support you with that. And what other topics would you like me to dive into when it comes to nourishing your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul? Let me know. You can leave a note in the comments, DM me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama, or even contact me through my website, mysticdogmama.com. Finally, if you're enjoying the podcast and haven't done so already, I would be so grateful if you would consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. This really helps me to know what you're enjoying, and it also helps other Mystic Dog Mamas and Papas who are looking for help and support to find the podcast and this beautiful community that we're creating together. Okay, until next time.